Adjourned to 2 p.m. We've reached the moment of interruption. The Honourable Member for Kings North.
Mr. Speaker, and indeed it's a great privilege to speak about this topic. In 1994, after I moved from New Brunswick to Nova Scotia to accept the pastoral charge in the pro-church, I was introduced, because the church was centred in one of the prime agricultural areas in Nova Scotia, in fact in Canada. I was introduced to many of the problems and many of the concerns of the farming community in Nova Scotia. I remember speaking to one of the members of the church, Mr. Eric Rand, now since deceased, and for some reason we got to talking about what would happen if he won $1 million, and he made the joke that if he, or the comment that if he won $1 million, he'd keep farming until he lost it all, until it was all gone. The agricultural industry in Nova Scotia is a very, very important industry. I use the word specifically, Mr. Speaker, industry, because it is an industry that provides enormous economic benefits to the province, that provides for many, many jobs. The farm gate for 2004 was almost $500 million. That's the size of what we're talking about. The direct jobs that were created were 8,000. In manufacturing and in indirect jobs, we had another 6,000 jobs on as well, and then the multiplier effect. In Kings County alone, which, Mr. Speaker, is the third most productive agricultural area in all of Canada, 80% of Nova Scotia poultry is raised in Kings County, 70% of Nova Scotia vegetables are grown there, and 55% of Nova Scotia pork comes out of the Kings County area. So agriculture, I guess the point I'm trying to make is agriculture is incredibly important to Kings County, incredibly important to the province of Nova Scotia, and is facing very, very strong challenges, Mr. Speaker. Challenges which affect not only agriculture, but, as I said, because of all the jobs that are created because of agriculture, it affects the lives of Nova Scotians. It affects the lives of every member here in the legislature. I've said at the start that we need to rebrand and change our thinking from agriculture to think of it as an industry, the way we do with other industries. And many farmers that I've talked to have agreed with me on this, and in fact have said, please push this, because we're very quick to hand out money to various industries across the province because they provide jobs, but we're not so quick to come to the aid of agriculture when it's needed. And yet, as I said before, agriculture is a huge industry here in the province. $500 million, 8,000 direct jobs, and all the indirect jobs and the multiplier effects that are created. Because of the importance of agriculture in Kings County, the Rotary Club in which I belong has a special day, well, actually 2 days, twice in the year, which is called the Rural Urban evening, in which they bring in special speakers and try and bridge that gap between the business community and the rural community to inform people about the importance of agriculture. AgriFest, which was a wonderful program put on by AgriPoint, again, was to help people understand the importance of agriculture, because one of the problems that I face as a politician within my own caucus, and a problem that other politicians who come from agricultural areas must face as well, is that fewer and fewer people realize directly the importance of agriculture. They're not exposed to it. They go to the supermarket, they buy their food, and they pay the lowest price, and they think that that's the end of agriculture. And this is one of the challenges facing agriculture. I said agriculture has many, many difficult challenges that it's facing. I mean, there's the traditional ones of weather, and when I was elected in 1999, it was after a period of about 3 droughts in a row. Fortunately, we don't talk about the droughts anymore. Those have passed, but weather is a constant challenge for the farming community. The threat of pests and the problems that they can cause, global pricing and the global market. Agriculture, Mr. Speaker, is a global enterprise. My farmers compete with farmers throughout the world. people have this image of sort of farmers as being backward. I don't know where it comes from. My farmers are on the forefront of global competition. When we talk about global industries, the farmers are there, and they're ahead of many of the other industries in the province of Nova Scotia. But the challenge, and one of the challenges that I want to talk about this evening, and that has arisen, is the challenge of the retailers in the province, Mr. Speaker. And this has come about in large part because of two reasons. One is vertical marketing, where wholesalers and retailers are joined together. And the other is the reduction in retailers, the reduction in number of options to which the farmer has to sell his or her goods. And the problem with this is the vertical marketing, the reduction in options, and thirdly, that the people who are doing the buying for these retailers more and more are buying out of the province, most often in Toronto, often people who have no direct exposure to farming, and certainly very little direct exposure to farming in Nova Scotia. And this creates enormous difficulties for our farmers trying to move their products. One of the very best farmers in Nova Scotia, and I would claim in Atlantic Canada, and Canada himself is a neighbor of mine, Richard Melvin. He grows cauliflower. Richard Melvin went through contortions trying to move his cauliflower crop. And here is one of the most he's been rewarded, recognized, and I know members across on the opposite side of the House would know this name and would know the respect with which this man is held in the farming community. And when this person has to go through those sorts of contortions to move his crop, I know that there's a major problem. And so the resolution. Now the resolution is, an apple pie resolution, basically. We all agree that retailers should provide more space for local products, and so we're all in agreement on that. That's good. But I think that we need to go further than that, Mr. Speaker. If moral suasion does not work with the retailers, if the retailers who have been talked to, I know, by the Minister of Agriculture, because I've raised this issue several times over the years that I've been, and he sat down with the retailers, and I understand that one of the retailers, and I probably shouldn't mention them in the House, but one of them is more open to local products. But nonetheless, if moral suasion doesn't work, then I, for one, Mr. Speaker, and I speak simply as an individual MLA, but I, for one, think that we need to do more. The retailers need to understand that we as legislators are serious about this issue. Because if the retailers will not make space and will not promote local products, then, Mr. Speaker, I fear in 10 years from now we will not have an agricultural industry in this province. Now, I may be overstating the case, but I have seen farmer after farmer after farmer in my area unable to move their product, having to go through enormous contortions, as I said, and accepting and having to live on low prices which do not allow him or her to expand their business, to refurbish their business, to buy the equipment they need to produce the crops that they want to produce. And so, Mr. Speaker, we need to demand from these retailers, not just ask them. And I've written to the Minister of Agriculture with this point. We need to demand that they sell a certain portion of their products as local products. We know in other provinces, in Quebec, for instance, I'm told that there's a very aggressive program by the provincial government there, and that the retailers respond. Now, I understand there's more retailers in Quebec than there are here, but they respond. So Mr. Speaker, I'm asking for moral suasion, but if moral suasion is enough, I'm asking as an individual that we do more, and I know that the opposition, I'm sure the opposition will support me in this. This is an important issue, and this is one that I want to get on the table, and this is one that for years I've talked about and written to the Minister of Agriculture about, and I'm at the point where I need to do more, I need to say more. More needs to be done, and I can't do it alone. Our farmers need the support that we as legislators can give them, and the retailers must listen to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The Honourable Member for Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am pleased to rise and speak on behalf of the Liberal Caucus, and I want to thank the member from Kings North for bringing forward this resolution. And I want to read the operative clause, which says, therefore be it resolved that local grocery retailers be encouraged to buy local Nova Scotia products. First of all, Mr. Speaker, and to the member from Kings North, I think it would be interesting to define what he means by local grocery retailers. We, for all intents and purposes, Atlantic Canada have a monopoly. Two giants are controlling what takes place, and quite frankly, they don't care whether that product comes from California or Annapolis County. It doesn't matter to them how many people in the agricultural industry are affected by this. Quite frankly, the only thing that matters to them is the bottom line. They are just concerned about what they have to pay for that product. And I don't think there's any greater threat to the rural economy of Nova Scotia than the monopoly that's taking place in the food retail sector. One of the problems is, Mr. Speaker, we're all afraid to admit that. We're all afraid to acknowledge the fact that we have a monopoly, or we absolutely have no control over what's going on in that industry. I, for one, have always supported the free market, believe in that, the way it works, but we're never getting back there in the retail industry, in the food industry. We need to begin to realize, the Honourable Member next door is afraid to use the term of regulation. We need to begin to start looking at this industry. The moral persuasion argument, quite frankly, is not going to work. It goes back to the bottom line. We need to be willing to stand up for the Nova Scotian producers and say, either we believe in them, we believe in the industry, and we're going to support them, and the only way to do it is by government to say, you have a responsibility to this province to do business here, and these are the steps you need to take. There's no better example to that, Mr. Speaker, than when you look at the dairy industry in Nova Scotia, and you look at the fact that it's a supply-managed product. And yet a few months ago, it was all in the news. A producer in Ontario was receiving the same amount for his product of milk as they were in Nova Scotia. Yet on the retail end in this province, the consumer was paying considerably more than a consumer in Ontario. Why? They might tell you for different reasons. I would suggest to you it's because there is no competition in this province. It's rather interesting, during the crisis that we had with the BSE, when the price was falling through the floor, and the producer wasn't receiving even a break-even price, we were unwilling to say you deserve a minimum price. Yet, what we do in the retail industry, the dairy sector, is we'll say to them, we'll guarantee you a minimum price of $5.19 for 4 liters of milk. And yet, in this province, it's selling for over $6.19. Try to use the moral authority argument on that. It just will not work. Government is going to have to step in. I fully support the supply-managed commodity, but we need to begin to look at why consumers of this province are paying so much more for a product than they are in other parts of this country. I'll give you another example. A constituent of mine who has spent decades in the produce industry. They have a farm market, and what they used to do was take their produce into the Annapolis Road to the local grocery retailer. They would take it to the back door, the manager would come and buy it. He had all the confidence in the world in that product. He had all the confidence that not only was that product of quality, but that product would arrive on time and be there for them, she's ready to use it. Lo and behold, a year and a half or so ago, they were informed that that policy needed to change. That policy had to change because they were being instructed that all product going into these franchise stores needed to go through central warehousing. Why? Because they were suggesting that perhaps that this issue was a way to ensure that the people of my constituency had a better quality of product. Well, there was no issue about the quality. What the issue is that it's a way to be able to control what we're going to pay the small producer in this province. You bring it through us, bring it through a wholesale warehouse, and we'll tell you what we're going to pay for it. If there happens to be a bad apple in the so to speak, in the box, we'll get rid of the whole thing. But they can control that. Not only are they controlling the retail price at this point, they are now beginning to control the wholesale price. This issue is of utmost importance to all Nova Scotians, but most importantly to rural Nova Scotia. Perhaps, Mr. Speaker, I should start by reminding the honourable member in the House of a commitment that John Hamm made in July 21st of 1999. On this date, the Premier pledged that the PC government would buy Nova Scotia goods first and overhaul tendering policies that hurt local businesses. 6 years ago. He further stated that his government will buy Nova Scotia first and they'll lead by example. I must ask, Mr. Speaker, how much progress have we seen on this issue and on leadership. 6 years later, I would say we've seen very little. It is interesting to note at the Progressive Conservative annual meeting, I believe it was 2004 meeting, when the Nova Scotia beef industry was going through its greatest crisis, the Premier made the announcement on institutional buying. To date, we're still waiting for that to be implemented. Ironically, in this province, we are able to supply product, beef product, to correctional facilities because it falls under provincial inspection. Yet we are unable to provide product to schools and hospitals because it falls under a federal inspection. And what have we done to try to rectify that in 18 months? Where have we moved towards trying to rectify that problem? We haven't done anything. It's rather ironic that we cannot feed our kids in school Nova Scotia beef, but yet we can feed inmates in correctional facilities. There's something wrong with that. There's been plenty of time for us to move forward on that. Mr. Speaker, the BSE crisis hit the industry in May of 2003, and to date, we've spent millions of dollars on this issue. Not one of these initiatives, though, have been used to ensure that local product arrives for the local people. I support, quite frankly, of making shelf space available not only for beef, but for all Nova Scotian products. Quite frankly, and I'll throw out the figure of 20%. And government needs to regulate it. Government needs to say there's a cost of doing business in this province. And one of those costs would be that if you want to sell Nova Scotia, if you want to sell product in this province, if you want to sell beef, we expect 20% of it to come from this province. It's a small number. You know, for every 10 pounds of hamburger, we expect 2 to be out of this province. I don't think that's too much to ask. I don't think that's too much to ask of an industry that is doing quite well in Atlantic Canada to come forward and support us. It was interesting during the election of 1999. I won't say in what constituency this happened to be in, but the Premier was accompanying a Progressive Conservative candidate, and Mr. Ham said local manufacturers and producers should have an advantage in competing for government contracts. Other provinces do it. Why aren't we? It's a good question. We'll start by leveling the playing field so that Nova Scotia companies enjoy the same advantages as companies in Newfoundland, New Brunswick, PEI, when they compete for government business in their home provinces. They were great words then. Why aren't they great words now? They should be enacted on. It's interesting when we look at the BSE crisis and you look at what's been put in place over a period of time, and you look at the abattoir that's been opened in Prince Edward Island. It was one that dealt with Atlantic Canada, dealing with animals that are under 30 months. We had a golden opportunity as a province to buy hooks. The government was offered those hooks, to buy them so that local product could be sent there and come back as a finished material, something that we could be using in our own institutions. What did we do? We sat idly by while that was happening. We've put in place, the government has said last December that they have put on the table money to buy those hooks. Well, we haven't done that as of yet. The only hooks that have been purchased for Nova Scotia have been purchased by specific producers, and they're using them for their own product. That is not ending up back into the institutions that the Premier spoke of at the annual meeting. And that just deals with one issue of this. You know, we begin, I think personally, and when it comes to the beef issue, we need to begin to look at this more than just locally. We need to begin to look at Atlantic Canada solution. What do we do with the cull animals? Why aren't we beginning to look at how do we deal with that across Newfoundland, PEI, and New Brunswick and Nova Scotia? Why aren't we beginning to say, why are there only packing places in this country in Western Canada or in Central Canada? What's wrong with Atlantic Canada? Why aren't we able to come together? You know, we're sitting here waiting for a border to open. Well, Mr. Speaker, that's going to open when our neighbors to the south decide it's going to open. There's not going to be anything we're going to be able to do here. So what do? Sit here and say there's nothing we can do? Of course not. We need to begin to explore markets. We need to begin, and I'll put it out there, encourage the federal government to put in place support to do an infrastructure study on how we can best position ourselves as a part of this country to take advantage of Europe. Why aren't we doing that at this point? We've spent millions of dollars trying to deal with this issue, and we've gone nowhere. In 6 months, those producers are going to be in the same position they were 6 months ago because we've done nothing to move this forward. I would just like to close off by suggesting that if the honourable member has any way of having any one of those two giants sit down at the table and the government is going to put the hammer to encourage them and force them to buy local product, I'll be more than happy to sit there and support that initiative as an individual member of this House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Recognized honourable member for Hants East.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the honourable member for Kings North for presenting this resolution. A worthy cause, I must say, and I listened intently to the member from Annapolis. He raised some good issues. It's a very big concern, Mr. Speaker, this whole issue of accessibility for local product, and the way in which the retail sector, which the member from Annapolis I think pretty clearly indicated, has become monopolized. And the saddest thing of all this, even if we were able to force, if that's the word we need to use, retailers, it has to be processors and retailers, to use local content. It would have to be on a basis, first of all, that they would only be forced to use whatever content was available, because in some commodities, we don't have enough to meet whatever their retail demand would be. And certainly in terms of beef, I've been told that Nova Scotia finishes about 8,000 animals a year, brings in 9,000 a month. So obviously, we could never fill the demand, but if they were only forced to take what was here and then go outside to get their own. And I explored this for some time, I must say, Mr. Speaker, and was at one point of the view that yes, this was possible. And actually, Mr. Speaker, I don't have photocopies, but I can get them so I can table them, because I don't want to table this book. But this is the consolidation of the agreement on internal trade, and this is the interprovincial trade agreement. And the point that took my attention, which I actually I thought, gee, it is possible to do something locally. And I was, in my term, the member for Annapolis said, he'd like to see a definition of the term local. And I checked, I forget now if it was Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. Anyway, I did try to find if there was a definition federally for local. And it was fairly flexible. I thought some people say local is defined by anything you can bring into the province within 24 hours. That wasn't it. It just referred to what they called, local geographic area. So that gives you a fair bit of leeway. But my concern was Nova Scotia, and so when I looked at this interprovincial trade agreement, Mr. Speaker, in Chapter 6, it says. 607, actually, Part 3, a party may, under exceptional circumstances, adopt or maintain a measure inconsistent with Paragraph 1 for regional economic development purposes, provided that the measure does not operate to impair unduly the excess of persons, goods, services, or investors of another party. The measure is not more trade restrictive than necessary to achieve a specific objective, and the party promptly notifies the other parties of the details of the measure. Now, it says that under exceptional circumstances, a party may adopt or maintain a measure inconsistent with Paragraph 1. So I'll read what Paragraph 1 says. No party shall impose or enforce in relation to an investor of a party or an enterprise in its territory or condition the receipt of an incentive by an enterprise or compliance with any requirement to achieve a specific level or percentage of local content of goods or services. Purchase or use goods or services produced locally. Purchase goods or services from a local source, or achieve a certain level of sales in the territory of another party. So this is really, under this chapter of investment, is very, very restrictive on the use of local. But I thought there may be a loophole in terms of an exception under a regional economic development program. I was kind of hanging my hat on that. Then it came to my attention in Chapter 9, Agriculture and Food Goods. On Article 905, non-sanitary and non-phytosanitary measures, no party shall amend any existing measure other than a sanitary or phytosanitary measure or adopt such a measure so as to restrict internal trade in an agricultural or food good. Well, I got to tell you, Mr. Speaker, that pretty well kills the notion of trying to promote local, because you'd be restricting goods from other areas. And actually, I met with people at Intergovernmental Affairs on this, and actually that department actually was pretty well responsible for writing this agreement, and the individual who wrote that clause on regional economic development, plus one individual who was an economist for the Department of Agriculture. And in terms of these trade issues, Intergovernmental Affairs looks at all the broad spectrum affecting government except for the agricultural side, and they have a specialist there of their own who speaks on this. So I was really hoping, actually, that it might be possible to have legislation that could do this. And I thought in particular of Pork Nova Scotia, which is already set up as a marketing board. They go to the Natural Product Marketing Council. They make a request for a price based on their cost of production, and the Natural Product Marketing Council can say, yeah, you made your case, we agree with you, here's the price you can charge for your hogs. But yet when they go to the processor can say, we don't have to buy your hogs. Or we don't have to buy your hogs at that price. Here's what we'll pay you. And then we get into this up and down around help from the government to try to help out hog producers or whatever. And it was always my contention that the price for the producer is already in the display case. We just had to come up with a mechanism to give him a greater share of that. Presently, about 48% of the dollar, consumer dollar, goes to the retail side. So 52% is shared among the processor and the producer. Well, I think we can pretty well bet who's getting the lower end of that deal. So, for my colleagues on both sides of the House, I want to say this, that this is a good initiative, this resolution. And the reason it's a good initiative is because these agreements are negotiated and renegotiated. And it's important that the message goes to the Premier, to the government, to whatever individuals in whatever department that sit down and negotiate these agreements, that some flexibility is brought back so that you can actually market local. And the reason it's important, the member from Kings North, he mentioned about the value in Kings County. Now, Kings County has one of the 3 highest agricultural receipts in this country after Niagara Peninsula and I think the Fraser Valley in British Columbia. Now that's pretty significant, but it's a very diversified economy in Kings County as well, and agriculture is one of the cornerstones of that economy. And if you were to pull that out of Kings County, all the other service sector, first of all, associated with agriculture would go, but then all the other services, because you have young families there, you can keep a school open, you have teacher salaries, you can attract a doctor or a clinic, whatever. And that's the reason we need to be able to give producers their price. And in all of this discussion, Mr. Speaker, there is no point having shelf space, getting local content, doing anything with local commodities if producers can't get their price. If producers are going broke producing it, what good have we done them? And that's what we have to do, Mr. Speaker. We have to have a mechanism not only that we can get local product in our stores, and I think fuel costs, et cetera, all these things are probably going to come together to make it more beneficial to be working locally, because in the long run, I think it's going to be cheaper. But I think we should move to help with cooperatives, farm markets, whatever we can do. But I like the idea on the big scale of getting local content in the superstores or in the grocery stores, because people are going there, the majority of Nova Scotians are going there to buy, and they're taking that home, and that's a market we should enter. The downside, or a couple of down stories, would be number 1, Peninsula Farm, number 2, Snare's Bakery. local, really serving their communities, creating jobs. That's the direction. It's an economic development issue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. I'd like to thank all members for taking part in this very interesting and important debate this evening. House is adjourned to 2 p.m. tomorrow.